assistance. We asked these questions, so what I'm reporting today are based on these two questions. Do you feel you belong here in Australia, and do you think the white Australian people feel that you belong here? We can discuss the wording of that question later if you're interested. Quantitative analysis of the results is really interesting. We found that a large majority of people said yes, they feel they belong in Australia. So they gave a positive response. 21, so 50 said yes, 21 responded in the negative, and 6 offered no response. Of these, 11 responses were ambivalent, including both positive and negative aspects. However, if you ask people, do they feel that the majority of Australians feel they belong here, you get a much more ambivalent response. 41 responded generally positively, 27 in the negative. However, many gave mixed or highly qualified responses. There were only 23 who gave unqualified positive responses. So participants generally feel as though they belong in Australia, but are far less certain that the rest of the population agrees. Okay, so most of the rest of the paper consists of some the responses from people to give you a sense of the ways in which participants both said yes, they belong, and no, they don't belong. And the yes part had to do with a sense of civic belonging, and the no part had to do with a sense of ethno-belonging. So here we have, do you think you belong here in Australia? Not really, because I do not understand Australian people in terms of communication, as I can't express in front of them and let myself be understood. Well, where do you belong then? I know that I belong to Australia because I receive assistance as a citizen. So this is the part, this sense that they're receiving the services that they need, that they have a right to as humanitarian entrants, or a right to the same as other Australians do, which is the basis for their sense of belonging. Another example. I don't feel welcome here sometimes, even though I wanted to be one of the Australians. But I'm hoping one day I will feel Australia is my home too. Is there anything that could be done to make you feel you belong here? Well, I belong here because the security here is good. I don't have to worry about anything. I'm getting the services that are normally needed to have progress, such as education, health. I can grow to what I want, and my dreams can be true. So you see, these are the same respondents saying both yes and no answers, but the yes and the no's refer to different things. Do you feel you belong here in Australia? Of course I believe that I belong here in Australia. Looking at the assistance and friendly manner in which the Australian government and people has rendered migrants from refugee backgrounds, Australia has become not only my home but the home of many others. We are sure of receiving our citizenship pretty soon after the completion of 4 years permanent residence. Do you feel you belong here? Yes, I belong here in Australia because we are no longer in Burma. So we have to follow the rules and live as they make the rules for the country. So you see that orientation to the, I'm following the laws of the country, and that's what defines me as belonging in civic terms. I want to tell you something regarding the support you get from Australia. I feel that I belong to Australia because I have the same support that the Australian people get from the government, such as Social Security and Medicare. Unbelonging. Here are some specific examples of the ways in which people feel they don't belong in ethno terms. And what is interesting about this is that nobody gave that theory to the refugees we were interviewing as part of this. Nobody said, now, you know, in social science theory there's this notion of civic belonging and ethno-belonging, this was generated inductively. This is the ways in which their responses kind of panned out, and they map clearly onto what the theory has told us. So here's an example from an Ethiopian man. Actually, I can't doubt that Australia is a very convenient country and we have very good support from the government, but I really have some concerns about the way of treating us. I feel like most of Australian people are racist. They judge you just because of your colour. I don't think the white Australian people, they don't want to communicate with us. They don't like us to be in Australia. Example, in my workplace, they seem to me like I'm not part of them. They see me like an animal. In TAFE, they segregate us. This is Africans. They think we are not part of them. They don't want us, the Africans, to be here. Do you feel you belong here in Australia? No, I do not feel that sense of belonging to Australia at present. Do you think the white Australian people feel you belong here? Yes, of course, all Australians treat us very friendly, but I think they do not accept us as real Australians. They try hard not to show it, but I believe this segregation exists. is another example. It's not a strong relationship, only hi, bye and see you, because Australian people don't want to create any deep relationships with migrants, and they just consider us as guests in Australia. Again, it's a problem of connections with Australians. I personally have this problem of connecting with them. Maybe this has to do with me, but in reality I do not think it's just me. For example, in our culture we just go and visit people anytime and find a reason to talk. But I have found it very difficult to do this with Australians. They get very tired being with us after half an hour and they cannot bear it anymore. And again, you see this kind of this positivity. I think it is a cultural problem which should be solved maybe with the passing of time. Okay, so in terms of improving things, when we ask people, so what can be done to improve your settlement experience? Again, we found that their responses broke into these two types of interventions, basically. So one was suggestions for programs designed to improve services and make them more accessible, and the other was suggestions for programs designed to improve interactions between refugees and mainstream Australians. So improving civic belonging, rights associated with education and training, health, employment, livable income, access to information, affordable housing, justice issues, transport issues, family reunion, access to citizenship, and social activities for youth. So these were the categories of civic programs that they suggested were needed. In terms of improving an ethno sense of belonging, participants recommended programs to encourage mutual trust and social relations with the wider population, such as a family mentoring scheme, policy-level initiatives to recognise and respect cultural differences. So more leadership in terms of recognising the value of diversity. And education for the general public about why the government accepts refugees, the value they bring to the country and so on, and anti-racism education. I won't go through the couple of photo voice examples that I had, and I'll just leave it. That's right.
I'm sure that we could all get some more materials from and our next speaker is Lisa Hartley, who is speaking on the challenges experienced by asylum seekers living in the community.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I do like to walk, so make sure I stand on the cross. Thanks for inviting me, for allowing me to speak today, I should say. It's great to be back here at MMIC. I looked here a little while ago. So today I'm going to be talking on a research project. It's a bit different to what I said in the abstract. It's just on one research project that myself and Caroline Clay have been working on at the moment. So it's a work in progress. And the results that I'm talking about today are very much descriptive. I haven't really done much kind of academic analysis on it. I'm just going to be recording what we've been finding in the research we've been doing so far. But I guess I want to start with just a bit of a background context, I guess, international context and Australian context to the research that we're doing. And really where it comes from is, I guess, the lack of voice about people living in the community or in detention who are asylum seekers. So, coming from this point, Forat argues that the refugee situation is generally framed by an asymmetry of power and voice between the state on one hand and refugees on the other. And so our research project and the research we do at the Centre for Human Rights Education comes from this space where we hope to elevate the voices of those people whose voices aren't really out there in the public sphere. So what we generally do is interviewing people who are either in detention or living in the community, and I guess seek to elevate those voices into the public sphere. So a bit of context definitions, and I'm sure you probably all know anyway, but I'm going to go through them because it provides justification as to why we're doing what we're doing. So an asylum seeker is somebody who is seeking protection. So they're outside their country of origin and they're seeking protection from the state that they're in. So they're waiting for their application for refugee status to be assessed. So the 1951 Refugee Convention, which was obviously a very important international human rights instrument, says that asylum seekers should be enabled to have their protection claim assessed in the country that they're seeking protection in. What's really interesting, in the time between somebody has crossed the border from their country and has sought asylum in another country, the UNHCR says that there's certain types of conditions that should be, I guess, enacted by that state to ensure the human rights of those people are upheld. And so what it's called, I guess, in the literature is this reception conditions. That country should enable particular types of reception conditions that enhance the human rights of asylum seekers or make sure that their human rights aren't violated. And so they say that the right, these conditions include the right to assistance to access what is necessary not only for survival, but also a life of dignity. And so these include things like accommodation, healthcare, education, employment, financial support, and so on. But of course, countries or nation states have the degree of, I guess, discretion to enact different types of reception conditions in terms of these points, I guess. Okay. Well,
You're pressing the bottom of it.
oh no, there we go. It's upside down. Thanks, Ray. Okay, so in Australia, again, you probably are aware of this, but in Australia, types of reception conditions that are offered to asylum seekers differs on one factor, whether or not you arrive with a valid visa. So if you arrive to Australia with a valid visa, so that means if you might have a tourist visa or a student visa, and you're in Australia, and then you might say to Australia, I want to claim for refugee status. Those people are actually processed in the community, and once their visa expires, they may get a bridging visa, and that bridging visa, I won't go into the details because it depends on what visa you get, but research kind of suggests that even if you're given the right to work on that visa, the vast majority experience homelessness, destitution, some may never find work, and often a reliance on NGO kind of welfare support. And this obviously has a significant impact on health and well-being for the community. Okay. So then the second category of people, which is obviously the people that we hear a lot about in the media, politicians, are people who arrive without a valid visa. So these are mostly boat arrivals, and their reception conditions are quite different. They're all the policy of mandatory detention. So if somebody arrives without a visa and applies for refugee status, they are put in mandatory detention, which means that they theoretically, until quite recently, would stay in detention for the whole time in which their claims are being processed. But then, of course, in 2011, I know NRC, for example, have done community detention. So people were then being released from detention into the community while their refugee claims were being processed, either in community detention or on bridging visas. Now, most recently, after, well, I won't go into the politics of it, but after there was a report, a major report that came out last year, called the Expert Panel Report, there was a new policy for anyone who arrived after the 13th of August of 2012. If they were released from detention, they'll be put onto a bridging visa where they couldn't work. They're very limited welfare assistance, so it's 89% of New Start allowance, of the basic New Start allowance, and there actually would be no processing on their refugee claims, so they still haven't actually started interviewing those people for their refugee interviews, I guess. So really living in limbo. So there's been no formal research on this cohort of people who are surviving their experiences in the community, and so that's what this research project is about. Oh, I'll get it right soon.
There's water on the table.
Oh, thank you. Anyone here? Okay. So what the aim of this research really was trying to, and it's still going on. My colleague Caroline Flay's in Melbourne at the moment, conducting interviews there. Is really to hear from people in this situation what are their experiences living in the community. So we've conducted kind of semi-structured, in-depth interviews with people in Perth, Sydney and Melbourne. I've just come back from Sydney, where I was conducting interviews there. As well, countries of origin have ranged Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. And again, we did keep it quite open in terms of what we spoke about in the interview or what we're speaking about in the interview, but we're asking things around health, housing, meaningful activities, support networks, things like that, based pretty much on what the reception standards were from UNHCR. But again, it was open to them to discuss what they wanted to discuss about their experience. And so I will press the button. I will just go through these are really kind of brutal themes that I've just put together in the last week. So just to give you a sense of what types of things people are talking about. And I've arranged it around, I guess, the issues around the denial of right to work, limited welfare, and also in terms of meaningful activities. So the denial of the right to work. This was something that was quite a salient issue for many of the people that we've interviewed so far. And I haven't kind of put an academic lens onto this, but it's really interesting. A number of people have spoken about how they feel like they're an animal, some type of animal. Someone's spoken about feeling like they're a sheep. But just not being allowed the right to work whilst being in the community, being able to see people in their everyday experience, working, going to work, but being denied that right. And it seems to be having quite a significant impact on people's self-esteem and self-worth. And of course, in terms of human rights, the right to work is a basic human right. It's seen as a fundamental to human dignity, essential to survival and development of human personality. And so what's coming out here is it seems as though this denial of the right to work is really having a significant impact on self-worth. And, previous research has found this about working and how much it's really important for people, particularly while they're waiting for their refugee claims to be assessed while they're in limbo. Which one do I press?
The left. The one next to you.
Closer to you.
There we go. Yeah. Right. Okay. This is another significant issue that's coming that a number of people have spoken about is the fact that they can't provide any kind of material care for their family. Mostly they're talking about people back in their home countries or wherever they are in asylum in other countries. And it also seems as though the fact that they're not allowed to work means it's almost as if they're constantly worrying about their family. What was really interesting was that with the people that were speaking about how important it is for I guess, giving money for their family, it was not that they had come to Australia because they wanted to work. They made that very clear. They have made that very clear because I think they're quite aware of the stereotypes that are being thrown around. But because they're in the community and they see other people working, it's really having a significant impact as well. Yeah, and it's also compounding their own survival of having, I guess, not being able to meet their own everyday needs as well, because they're living off $440 a fortnight and having to pay for, that's for rent, food, clothing, home, everything as well. Another really interesting issue was around feeling like a burden. Again, I've spoken about this. I see Australians working really hard, going on the trains going to work, I feel bad, I can't help them. So there's kind of denial of agency for people who are living there, seeing everybody else living their lives, I guess, and not being able to engage in that. And I guess it comes back again to what Frida's speaking about belonging as well. But what's interesting is there's been research that has been conducted on people, the first cohort of asylum seekers I was speaking about, who live in the community right from the beginning. Some of them aren't allowed to work, and this is done an audit on the amount of, I guess, GDP that's been forgone by not having them work. So I don't know if you can see there, it's estimated between 8.7 million and 22.9 million as well. So as I said, they're getting paid $440 a fortnight. As a serious increased risk of homelessness and secondary homelessness is really, really common. We're obviously invited into people's homes to see where they're living. People are living in quite difficult situations where maybe 3-bedroom house, 12 people living in that house, for example, just to kind of make ends meet. Also because it's quite difficult to get, as we know, from getting rental properties, even as refugees who have been here for 2 years, 4 years, let alone somebody who has a visa that's 6 months. There's also exploitation from landlords. Again, 12 people in a house each paying quite a significant amount of money for rent. So there's indication that there's people profiting from the situation. What's quite interesting is the role of social support. So people who have friends and family in the community are obviously finding it a lot easier to get support and to get housing. Those people who don't have that are in quite dire situations. One of the people we interviewed was actually homeless, I think for probably around about a week, where he literally did not have a home to live in. Destitution, so some spoke of the inability to afford basic necessities, food, and also concerns around not being able to call home, have money to call home. But again, the social support was really important in this situation, because if they had friends and family that they could get support from, it was a little bit better. And there's also indications of informal labour, not from people that we've interviewed, but from stories that they have told of people being forced to work in informal labour, getting paid really small amounts of money, $4 or $5 an hour, to make ends meet. And so obviously previous research has highlighted this is a real issue when you don't provide adequate support for people in the community. Okay, and the last, the lack of refugee processing. So that means, so they haven't actually, the people that we've interviewed, they have not even been interviewed for their refugee claims. So some of them have been in the community for 8, 9, 10 months, but still have not been interviewed. So this is a really significant issue that's coming out around the uncertainty of their future. So this gentleman he described, again, reference to thinking about himself like an animal, feeling like a rat in a wheel. Days go by, day after day, with my mind going round in circles, round and round in circles, what to do. And here he was talking about, well, when can I get my family here? When will I even get an interview for my refugee claims? And so this really is about being in limbo, not having a clear defined education of what's going to happen next. And I did interview right after the election, and that came up a lot as well, of fears around what government policies might impact on their lives. And again, this appears to be a more salient issue for people who have been here for longer. I guess because they probably have more time to think about what's going on and what's going on with their future. Meaningful activities is also a significant thing. So I've done research previously for people who have been released from the community from detention into the community, and meaningful activities is really important for a sense of self sense of well-being. They're not allowed to engage in study on this cohort of asylum seekers. And there's very limited voluntary activity. I know there's some agencies, Red Cross in Perth, doing a fantastic job in trying to provide those opportunities and those activities, but many of them either don't know about it or can't get there because it's too expensive in terms of, because transportation costs in Perth, as you know, in Perth and in Sydney, asylum seekers aren't given concession cards, so it's very, very expensive. But what's really interesting is in the absence of work and study, some people have been speaking about the real importance of physical activity. So even things like going running or for the gym. There's a fantastic Belmont gym that's got a really good deal on at the moment. A really good deal. But yeah, so just to keep the mind active. So they've been quite innovative in trying to make sure that there is some kind of structure in their day, despite the fact that they're quite limited in the types of rights that they're given. What else is there? And obviously social exclusion is a serious, is another issue that's coming out. And I guess in terms of what Free was speaking about belonging, that there really is this real lack of contact with the Australian community. We asked a question around that and most of them have said no, I don't have any contact with anyone. Often just report existing in their own apartment or their own room because they can't get out and work, or they can't get out and study, or they can't go transport to go anywhere. So this is a significant issue as well. So, and obviously previous research has highlighted the importance of things like employment, establishing family relationships, educational opportunities, and seeking affordable and appropriate housing has been important for social inclusion, which is quite opposite to the types of stories that come out from our research. So these are, I guess, quite preliminary kind of conclusions. The experiences of, got men there, but we did actually interview women, so I apologise about that. It just suggests that placing asylum seekers in the community with restrictive receptive conditions can be quite harmful. At least from the participants' perspectives and people that we've interviewed so far, it's far from being consistent with a life of dignity. And I've suggested a number of kind of possible advocacy avenues, I guess, to follow up in terms of trying to enhance dignity, things around work rights, transport concessions, and access to study for a start. But of course, that does rely on political, but also community will as well. So we'll see how that goes.
So it'll be interesting to maybe down the track to do a longitudinal study about what the mental health outcomes are compared to physical detention, better, worse, or the same. Because our mental health tend to spend a lot of people in community detention, and really it's scary to think that the majority of these people will actually be in the community with mental health issues and not be able to contribute meaningfully as they're wishing to do at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Thank you. And our next speaker is Therese McCaleb. Am I saying that correctly? Therese. And Therese will be speaking on sharing stories, sexual health education, evaluation. That was conducted at MNF.
Okay. I'll be quick because I think time is running fast. My name is Therese, and I'm here today to present to you the evaluation from the Sharing Stories Youth Drama Program research that was undertaken by Megan Roberts. She's not here today, so I'm going to be presenting her findings from her executive summary. I've got some things that we'll hand out. It will be tea break soon, so I'll just leave them out the front for you to collect. So I'll just explain to you a bit of behind the reasoning of the research. So it is known that culturally and linguistically diverse, also known as coloured, we all know that, youth often receive limited reproductive and sexual health education during adolescence. It is a subject that is regularly overlooked by settlement services and programs and considered a taboo topic among many cultures. Coloured youth have little experience in and accessing sexual health services due to language, social and environmental barriers and are accustomed to issues of shame surrounding sexual health. Health professionals and researchers within the sexual health sector are progressively acknowledging that cultural factors can